Toronto, hello. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Saran Counts. I am the Director of Programs at Women in Product. It is my pleasure to introduce you to this wonderful workshop today from our friends at Meta. Meta, we love that you are continuing to support Women in Product with your sponsorship. We love having you guys. So I will turn it right on over to you.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to be here with Sammy. I'm Naomi Gleit. I am the head of product at Meta, and I lead the teams that build products across all of Meta's apps. So Instagram, Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp, and our technologies, our new platforms. I am also joined by Sammy. As I mentioned, she's been at Meta for 12 years. She started in product operations right out of college, and she became one of the first PMs on Instagram in 2013. So really old school. And today she is one of the most amazing people working on my team, helping to ship some of the most difficult, complex cross-org projects that we have at the company. I am responsible, sort of my world, for building products, like I said, that work across the different Meta technologies. These include technologies around helping people do good. We're building tools that help people do good, that help our products grow, and that help keep people safe on our community. I've been at Meta for almost 17 years, so you can imagine all the different things that I've seen over the course of that time. And I really, my dream job was always to become a product manager. In 2006, I finally became a PM. And I had never been a PM before. I didn't even know what it was. So I learned a lot of things on the job. I learned them from the people that I work with. And as I started building my own PM team, I found myself repeating the same advice to people. And eventually people were like, why don't you just write that down? And that way you can share it with more people. And so I did. Just last week, I published these what we call Naomi-isms, and you can see them on Naomi.com. Sam, if you just advance, they are just like words of wisdom, advice, lessons that I've learned about how to be a killer PM. They're frameworks, they're processes. A lot of it is just language to use. That's really helped me, and I know a lot of other people in the PM community at Meta and also other functions. And now we're seeing people outside of the company have some value from them as well. So one of my favorite ones is called Canonical Everything. Canonical is the word that I use to mean the one and only version. So it derives from the word canon. And I think it's really important to have canonical everything. There's a poster in my room that says Canonical Everything. Because when I would jump into a new project, a lot of times the projects that I would work on were really turnaround situations. Something was not going well and needed to be fixed. And I would start my first day on the team and ask, well, how can I find out everything I need to know about this project? And I would get a lot of different answers from a lot of different people, pointed at a lot of different places. And that was sort of the motivation to ask, well, we need a canonical document. We need one place that has all of the basic information that I need to know about this project, with links to go deeper on them if I want to. And so that was the notion of a canonical doc. At the highest level abstractly, this is around always having a clear version that creates extreme clarity around information that people need to know. We've developed a playbook around how to achieve this. And just really tactically, it starts with a canonical doc. Next slide. And this is just really important. Sammy, is this me? I think this might be you. Why is Canonical Everything so important? You speak to it.
I'm happy to jump in right now, in fact. Okay. Yeah, so I think that actually one of the things that Naomi has always told me, actually well before I even joined her team, but even when we were working together, when I was supporting her product teams, was very much that the reality is, and I'm sure that everybody in the chat can really this probably resonates with a lot of you, which is very much the problems that we work on are already really super complicated. So if they're already really complicated, then the last thing that we need to do is add more complexity by having complex communication channels or having unclear ownership. The last thing that we need to do is have all of that confusion and chaos around it. So especially when you're in a turnaround situation, like Naomi was talking about, but even in any kind of situation, really, having canonical everything is really important because it lets you actually focus on the product, which I think is it's what we're all here to actually do. And then the next piece of advice that Naomi also gave me is very much that like canonical everything is not a process that you implement and then check the box on. It is really like a culture. It is a thing that you imbue your entire product team or your entire org or whatever sort of like the unit of business is that you'll work with as a product leader. And I really like this because I kind of think of canonical everything as like, it's more than a habit. It's like an instinct that you have. And so the more that you can imbue this instinct to the rest of your team, the more effective it becomes. And that's really about building this culture of canonical everything. And there's a few different ways to do it. I'm going to kind of walk through how you would like prioritize canonical everything, especially at the beginning, and give a couple of like concrete tactics. And then Naomi's going to walk through how you empower your team and how you lead your team, which she's been doing at Meta for the last 17 years. So the first thing that you need to do, as we all know, the world's a prioritization problem, is you need to prioritize canonical everything. And I think that there's like a few different ways that are really key to do this. The first one is that you have to create the space to do it. I know that, and I feel this way literally every time I jump into a new project, especially if it's very urgent, which I would imagine a lot of the people on this call are probably working on right now. There's a lot of pressure to just get to execution immediately, but actually you will save yourself time in the long run if you kind of like take a little bit of space at the beginning and say like, what is the goal of this? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the work streams that we need in order to accomplish that goal? And who are the people that we need driving each of those work streams? It will feel maybe frustrating the first couple of times that you do it because you'll want to just like get into the product and start doing it, but it definitely pays off. And the second thing that I found in sort of working, especially on these really cross-org projects at Meta, is that you have to reinforce it and you have to repeat yourself until you think that you are an absolute broken record. This is part of what it takes to get canonical everything to not just be sort of a habit, but to be an instinct, which is like, you need to be that person in the room repeating over and over, these are the canonical work streams, these are the people who are owning it, and this is our goal today. So I'll turn it back over to Naomi to talk about how you can empower your teams.
Perfect. So, I mean, I think that we talked about the canonical doc. What is actually on the canonical doc? Sammy talked about the canonical work streams. It's really important that we identify the work that needs to be done. And then I have a notion of canonical work stream owners. Every role in a project really needs to be clear. The roles that I often call out are the STO. This is the single threaded owner. They are supported by a quarterback. This is someone that helps drive, does a lot of the project management and day-to-day work. The STO is the person who's ultimately responsible. The buck stops with the STO. They are the overall leader. But oftentimes they're more senior. They may not have the time to be in the details of the project every single day. So you have the STO, the QB. You have the work streams with work stream owners against each work stream. A lot of times you'll have sub-work streams within a work stream, something that I call tracks, and each of those will have owners. So just making all of the roles in a project clear. I also think it's important to have a notion of the working team, like all of the people that are working on a project, and then a leadership team. This is the group of people that are giving feedback, giving advice, that are holding the working team accountable, that are being a sounding board for the working team. So you want to create channels for the working team to communicate or escalate to the leadership team. And so that has to do with, canonical work chats, canonical email lists, canonical groups. What are the communication channels that you're using to communicate between the working and the leadership team? Next slide. And then leading by example. Sammy talked about this being something that you are like, it's not just something you do, it's a culture that you live every single day. Canonical everything is the most important way to accomplish what I call extreme clarity. Sammy talked a little bit about why extreme clarity is so important, because things are already so complex and confusing. You don't want to make your life even harder by making the meta work around it even confusing, like the work streams, the work stream owners, how you communicate. There are a lot of other tips that I have for extreme clarity, things like always having a visual in a meeting, always editing real time in the meeting, the takeaways from the meeting so that there's no confusion. Things like using numbered lists instead of bulleted lists so people can refer to them. Things like obviously having canonical everything. A lot of times the language that people use is really important. I talk about canonical nomenclature. I have an example of where I was on a project where people were using the word consistency and accuracy interchangeably. And we had sort of a eureka moment when we realized they're actually very different things. Accuracy talks about how often you get something right. Consistency talks about how often you get an answer that's consistent with the previous answer. And so accuracy and consistency mean different things because it's different to be consistent than to be right. So things like cleaning up the language that we're all using so we're not talking past each other. Another thing is canonical frameworks that we use to talk about the work and organize the work that we do. And the best way to create extreme clarity around a framework is to visualize it. I think visuals are really important, and we talk about canonical visuals. So these are all things that I try to do whenever I'm working to lead by example for the team. One important thing about canonical everything is that it recurses. So if I'm doing this all at the highest level, within projects, the STOs for those projects are doing them. The owners for the work streams are doing them all the way through the organization. Sammy.
Cool. Okay, so if you scroll down, I think on the screen that you're looking at, if you're calling into this virtually, then basically you'll actually see that that Naomi and her team have provided a bunch of worksheets and sort of templates. These are really, really handy. I use these on basically a daily basis, and I've been at this company for 12 years. So I continue to refer back to these templates literally all of the time. But there's a doc template, which will help you set up sort of like the canonical work streams and figure out how to like present it with the utmost clarity so that everybody just scanning it has a really clear understanding. There's also a meeting template, which has been really, really helpful. So Naomi talked about like always having a visual and stuff like that. These meeting templates will really help you just like make sure that you follow all of those like best practices. There's also a worksheet of the 10 best practices. This is stuff that like, again, you need to like live and breathe in order to get your team to really feel the canonical everything culture. And then finally, there's a template for slides, including a few frameworks in it. So feel free and check those out. I think like, in your own time, like feel free and think about like, what are some projects, if you could retro a project that you've already done, what might be a way that you could like reorganize that project to fit with to have a canonical framework, for example, or to have canonical tracks. And then I very much recommend just like using these templates. I use them all the time myself, and I've been using them. So hopefully they're really, really helpful.
I mean, I use them in my personal life too. So that's where I knew that this transcends just like product work. It can be applied to a lot of anything that needs to get done, basically any work that needs to get done. A lot of these things are very valuable.
Yeah, I also very much use this in my personal life. And I bet that there are a lot of people here who joke about like PMing their lives and stuff.
Yes.
And this is like huge value add to your life.
A lot of my friends will often say to me, Naomi, don't PM me, because I go into PM mode and start organizing them into work streams. And this is really like for a bachelorette party or something.
Anyway, anytime you PM my life, I like my life. So don't listen to them. Anyway, we're going to turn this over to Q&A in a couple of minutes. So if you guys have questions, just start putting them into the chat. And then I think Saran will help us kind of like keep track of them. But just while people start putting some questions into the chat, I'll just start off with one for you, Naomi. Like, I think that this is something that I really struggled with earlier on, and you've sort of like coached me through. But sometimes when you're new on a project, it's really hard to set aside time to set up canonical everything. There's so much pressure to just like get into execution immediately. And so I guess like my question for you is like, what are some tactics that you found to really convince people like, hey, we need to take a beat. We need to write down our frameworks. We need to write down the work streams. We need to decide who's in charge. Like, what are some tactics that you found to like convince the group just to like take some space up front at the beginning of a project?
Sammy, it's such a great question because I think it's really about slowing down in the short term to speed up in the long term. Again, when we're jumping into a new project, sometimes we're not always the most well received too, because often we're going into projects and teams that have been operating for a while, unless we're starting like a whole new project from the beginning, we can really set the tone. But in like turnaround situations or situations where something can be improved, we show up and we have all these ideas about how to initially, I guess, take a beat and slow things down. I think there's a few different things. As a PM, I think in general, I've just really confronted a lot of skepticism around process in general. The highest level thing to really communicate is that process doesn't have to slow people down. Process can actually speed people up. One thing I talk about a lot is perfect execution. We need to execute perfectly on the strategy to know if it was right or wrong. And in order to achieve perfect execution, we need to do a lot of these things like extreme clarity, canonical everything. Because imagine the worst case scenario is you execute on the strategy, and because you didn't execute perfectly, it's sort of like it fails. You don't know if you didn't execute perfectly. You don't know if the strategy is right. And that in itself is a really, really, really big waste of time. And I've often found myself in that situation. And so I think there's just been an evangelical or advocacy thing around process in general. I believe that you move faster through the right people and the right process. And so you have to believe like things like taking a beat in the beginning of a project or when you begin to get involved in something will speed people up in the long term. I mean, one way that I do it is just start asking the questions. It's like, hey guys, where can I find the list of work streams and the owners? And then people don't have it. And then I'm like, okay, you know what? Here's a template. I'm going to start filling this out for you. A lot of times, Sammy, and I see you do this all the time, is sort of start doing the work for people. So to the extent that it's not really creating more work for them, it's not even really slowing them down. It's just sort of like an investigative thing where you're asking questions, trying to get the information out of people. And then you're the one doing a lot of the heavy lifting around actually putting it in a canonical doc template. Also, it's not that much work to create a canonical doc, right? Like you and I know the hardest part about it is really just figuring out who's working on what and what are they working on.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's sort of like if it's a lot of work to create the canonical doc, then you know that there's a different root problem that actually needs to be resolved.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. You probably have the wrong people. You probably have the wrong work streams and there's some deception there.
I also think that there's this aspect that I've been thinking a lot about actually, since we're at the Women in Product conference, around also like what Canonical Everything does. And I think you reinforce this with me a lot around like having canonical groups and having canonical chats, is it ensures that all the people are included on the right decisions for them. And that's really, really important because like, I think that a lot of us have probably felt like, why was I left out of a certain decision? Why was I left out of a certain meeting? And Canonical Everything is a way to really like operationalize that all the right people are going to be in the right places. And that's just like a really valuable thing, I think, especially for us talking about today.
I love that. And that's a great example of something that actually speeds people up. How many people have been in like 5 different meetings with 5 different permutations of the same group of people? I hate pairwise conversations. A lot of times I'll bring people together in one meeting that ultimately has all the right people, that is structured properly, will then save us 4 other meetings. Pairwise, that takes me 2 hours because I, covered it in one meeting with everybody.
Totally. Okay, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat, Saran. I don't know if you were.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've been kind of keeping up with them. So I'll say this, if anybody wants to come on stage and verbally ask their question, you can do that. And when we get around to that, I will put you on stage. But before we do that, there's a question from Esther. And I think this is referring to one of your earlier slides. Can you give some examples of titles in those roles? Who plays the role of STO, QB, workstream owner, etc.?
Definitely. So Sammy, maybe we should pick a project that like maybe you and I are on. So Sammy and I are working on something called a Move Fast initiative, just like trying to help the company overall move faster. Let's just say, that's the name of the project, Move Fast. And that's a value that we have at Facebook. It's called, Move Fast. And as we grow, we want to still be able to pivot and have velocity and basically act with urgency and remove barriers that are slowing us down. I am the STO of that project. So I'm the head of product. I'm the STO of that project along with the head of engineering. He's a co-STO. In general, you don't have 2 people that are the STOs, but in this case, I think it makes sense because product and engineering are sort of the most critical functions to ensuring us, a high velocity product development environment. Sammy is the QB. So Sammy is a PM. She is the driver. She's the one really helping on the day-to-day work. And on the working team, we have a working team. We actually have a meeting right after this with the work stream owners. They're the owners of all our different work streams. And then, next week we'll have a review with the Move Fast leadership team. So the working team will review their work with the leadership team. Sammy, do you have any other examples that might help explain the titles and the different roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think just to put a finer point on it, I think, you'll probably, as an STO, you really want them to be a pretty senior person who has pretty firm decision-making power, meaning they can sit in a meeting and approve or give really high level context to help the teams move faster. And a QB, I think, would be a little bit more like me, basically. So I am a senior IC or a senior individual contributor, depending on what you call that at your company. And I will actually get in with the teams and the working teams and help move things along and help do the work on a day-to-day basis. So you kind of want to separate. Whereas, Naomi, well, she magically does somehow often do that, but really she is an executive and she has an org that she also needs to manage. And so I'm almost I try and think of myself as a second brain almost. I'm okay, well, this is what would Naomi have done in this situation, and how do I make sure that that gets accelerated or gets done? And how do we also watch out for problems? And how do we also catch if we're maybe going in the wrong direction sometimes? That's the other thing that I think a QB is really, really useful for. They're not purely just following a script. Yes. There is no script. You are really responsible for making sure that the plan that you've put in place is actually the right thing for the people that you're serving.
And of all the different roles, I actually think the QB is the most important. I weigh in, in one of 10, every 10 decisions to sort of guide it in the right direction. And I think Sammy is really working with the teams, the workstream owners, to make 9 out of 10 decisions on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And the nice thing about the Canonical Everything framework is that it's completely recursive, like Naomi said. So for example, in Move Fast, we might have Naomi, who is the VP of product, and Saba, who is our VP of engineering, sort of as the STOs, and then sort of a senior IC as a QB. But then the work streams may have some VPs as a work stream owner. They might have some directors as a work stream owner. And then their QBs might be sort of senior ICs as well. And so that's one of the really nice things, which is that you can kind of the level at which you would insert a person to be an STO or a QB or on the leadership team or something can actually be adjusted for whatever the scope of the project is that you're working on.
Yes.
All right, so I'll get to the next question. And since we have some people that are still joining, if you missed it, you can scroll down under the presentation. That's where you'll see a link to all the templates. All right, so Kimberly asked a great question. I imagine implementing this system requires full org or full company buy-in. How widely used are these templates at Meta, and how are you able to get buy-in?
Sammy, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Okay, so I think that, so at a company in Meta, because we're constantly growing, I think we're always trying to make sure that these are available for especially all of the new PMs, but also any new engineers or tech leads or designers who want to join. These are not purely for PM, though I think that PM can certainly utilize this probably the most, I guess. And so I think that though that one point to make on this is actually a little bit of, Naomi kind of touched on this, which is that sometimes you don't necessarily need the entire org to buy in. Sometimes you can just start doing Canonical Everything. You can just get in there and project your screen and start writing down okay, so how would you break up this work? And then start writing down work stream 1, this, work stream 2, that, and just start writing it down. And you'd be amazed at how much just putting that in front of everyone and asking some pretty simple questions in an investigative way can actually be the vehicle in which you get buy-in for the rest of your org. I do think that, especially in product, I don't know, I do think that we have a tendency to we need to do not be told something. And so the more that you just do it and put it in front of people, the more likely they are to buy into it, as opposed to reading it in a document or something.
Totally. No,
all right. So Kimberly had a follow-up question. Yes. I'm sorry, Naomi, did you want to say more?
No, I was saying Sammy crushed it.
Yeah. So Kimberly had a follow-up question. How to transition away from previous practice into new process. Older documents will still be everywhere and outdated, for example.
Yeah, I think I like Sammy's strategy of just like creating the original canonical doc. Over time, it's not going to be a like, in one day, everyone will deprecate or everyone will stop using all of the old docs that, have been floating around. You just start elevating the canonical doc. You create it, you show it to people, you start projecting it in every single meeting, you start referencing it in every single meeting, you start sending it out as a link after every single meeting. Those are the kind of things that get people to adopt it. And those other docs, we're not talking about only having one doc. We're talking about if this is a pyramid, the canonical doc is at the top level of the pyramid. That doc, because everything recurses, will then link to recursive canonical docs. So I'm talking about the highest level project doc, that's one. And then there will be like, let's say 5 work streams. Each of those 5 work streams will have its own canonical doc that's linked to from the first one. Within those work streams, there might be sub work streams. So let's say each work stream has 3 sub-tracks or sub work streams. Those will have canonical docs. So, at the end of the day, you might end up having, let's say, 20 different docs. However, they all start and they all are simplified up in one document. Because again, what we're trying to solve is, say I'm new to a team, I have no idea what's going on. What's the most basic information that I need to get? We're not going to send them 20 docs. We're going to send them the one canonical doc, and from there they can find out all the information they need to know.
Yeah. I think that that's exactly it. It's like you're kind of like evolving a process or a system. You're not like getting rid of a previous one. And I think that that's especially valuable framing, especially when you come in a turnaround situation, which maybe we're talking about in this situation. Another thing is also that I don't know, a tactic that you can often use is also like, hey, why don't we just try all this? There's nothing, we're constantly testing things all the time in our products and stuff like that, but there's nothing wrong with just saying hey, can we just try combining these meetings into one meeting? And you know what, if it doesn't work, we'll go back in 2 weeks. And that's another tactic that I think has been really, really helpful in sort of helping teams change a way that they've been doing something, sometimes for years, they're just let's just try something new. And you know what, we can always go back if this doesn't work.
Yes.
All right, I have got to get to this question from Jen Pierce. I hope I pronounced that correctly because it is a wonderful question. So she says, it sounds like product managers are heavily involved in delivery/project management. For example, tracking status, making sure people did what they were going to do, etc. Is that an accurate view? And if yes, how much time do product managers typically have to spend on figuring out what are we building and why versus managing workstream delivery?
I mean, this is a great question. And in general, I really think that product managers need to do both product management and project management. Project management is part of all of our jobs. And it's not like it's a burden or something that's not valuable. Indeed, I think so much of our agency and soft influence and, making the small decisions is enabled by doing the project management of the day-to-day work. At the highest level, PMs are responsible for both strategy and execution. You're asking for the time breakdown. How much of it is strategy? What are we building? How much of it is execution, delivering and managing the workstream delivery? I think it really depends on the project, but you need to be doing both in the right balance that makes sense for the work that you're doing. And it's not like we figure something out, we have a spec, and then we go build the spec. So much of the strategy is really worked out in the details that get executed on day to day. And that's why I think it's really important to not just be delivering a spec to somebody else that executes it. It's critical to do both the strategy and the execution, and it's an evolving process. Sammy, would you agree with that? I mean, I think so much of your job is both of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really do think that I think the thing that sort of that I always, talk to my teams about or other PMs about is very much yes, there is a lot of project management, but at the end of the day, PMs are still held accountable for, did you get to the right outcome?
Yeah.
And so you're really looking at the project management as a tool to accomplish the right outcome for people. And so like, I think it's impossible that like, always good process will always lead to a great product. Like sometimes your hypothesis is wrong, but I do feel very confident saying that bad process will always lead to a bad product. I think that that's kind of what Canonical Everything does. The other aspect of this, and we sort of had this, let me see if I can quickly find the slide, is also around like, I think of also Canonical Everything and sort of like project management and setting up work streams and ensuring that those work streams are operating with clear swim lanes. I think of it as really what number 2 here says, which is like a simplification vehicle. It's around taking this really complicated product and everybody, and you might have dozens of people, if not potentially hundreds of people working on the same thing and coming at it from different directions. And at the end of the day, what sort of like the process can help you do is it can help you just simplify it down to the barest things that you actually need to make the best possible decision. And that's what we're here to, that's what product managers are responsible for at the end of the day. It's like, did we get to the best possible outcome that we could have given the situation? And Canonical Everything is the process in which you can make sure that that happens.
And Sammy, what did you say? Because you've worked on a lot of different teams, me too, that when we join a team that isn't like thriving and there's something to fix, a lot of times it's not the strategy. It's not like they have the wrong idea or they like had the wrong hypothesis. A lot of times it's a process problem, a people and a process problem. And so that's why these things are so important to fix. That seems much more common, the root cause of an issue on a team, rather than like, they just came up with like a bad plan or something.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think like I talk with some of my friends who are also PMs, of course, about this, and like we'll say like ideas are often very cheap.
Yes.
Right. Like a lot of I think that a lot of us, maybe even the people who are watching this right now, have been in situations where, you've seen an idea kind of get turned around by one team in your company and then get turned around by a different team. And over the course of a few years, you kind of finally come to something that really works. A lot of the time, it's not because like the original idea was bad. There is an aspect of timing in this, of course, which makes a lot of sense. But I think a lot of the time, what I find often is that the execution was just off. And then that is like the most infuriating reason to have something that you're building not work, because you had the idea, you had the thing. It's just that if you don't execute on it perfectly, then like you won't really know if your idea was the right one in the end or not.
Yes.
All right. So another follow-up question from Kimberly. From Kimberly around. Oh no, I lost it. Oh, how do you make sure that you are always working with the most updated version of the process? How do you keep people from going in, putting different versions in, etc.?
I mean, that is, Kimberly, I think you really hit on the entire point of the canonical doc, is someone should not create their own version of the canonical doc, because then there's 2 canonical docs, which makes it not canonical. Again, I think sort of the same tactics that Sammy and I talked about is like, we create it, we show it in every meeting, we send it in everything. I've had times where I was like, hey, just redirecting people who do create those variations. It's like, this already exists here. Could you, delete yours and put that information here, stuff like that. Some of this is housekeeping, but truthfully, I think for the most part, when things add value to people, they adopt them. If it makes people's lives easier, you don't get that resistance. And so our challenge is just to like do some of the upfront work, show that there's value, and then people, it's more work to create your own version of a canonical doc than to just leverage the existing one. So over time, I think incentives are aligned.
Yeah, I think that there's also just similar to that, I think that there's also just this aspect around like, this is where repetition becomes so important, because if you like start every single, like Naomi always reminds me of this, like every email that you send for a specific project, always include the canonical work streams right at the top. Because what you're trying to do is like, you are creating like, you have to like almost make it like impossible for someone to not cover your canonical doc. And then in the end, it just makes things easier for them, actually. So like all of these things really, really help. I think that Saran maybe had a technical problem, so I'll go on to the next question, which is like, I think it's from Cynthia Wang, which is like, how do you continue to update this, showing the delta in these docs?
I mean, Cynthia, that's a great question. A canonical doc is always a living doc. On average, I am updating the doc pretty much every day, to the extent that I'm looking at it every day in every meeting, and things are changing, like these are not static things. Ideally, you're not changing major things like the, entire scope of the project and the number of work streams and who the owners are. But obviously, as things evolve, work changes, owners change, people go on, vacation or take on different roles, and like different people slot in. And so I'm updating these all the time.
Yeah. And I think if the change log is somehow really important because you want to be able to track, one thing that I remember Naomi giving me the advice to do on a project that I was working on last year was she was like, okay, like it looks like you've gone through 3 phases of the canonical at this point. Why don't you like write down phase 1? What did that look like? Phase 2, what did that look like? Phase 3, which is what we were in at that point. What does that look like? And just like leave it at the bottom of the doc. And if that record is somehow going to be useful to you, you can always keep it, but you kind of want to keep it at the bottom so that nobody's distracted and they always know what the most recent is.
That's great. And sometimes, like we had a rebrand that we recently did to Meta, and we completed the rebrand, and that sort of kicked off a beyond the rebrand project that we started up, a new project with new work streams, and sort of refreshed the work there. Even though it was a continuation of essentially the same work, it was a new chapter in that work, and it yielded like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, beyond, that kind of thing. So that's totally fine.
Okay, another question from Genesis is, does it make sense to implement this at the squad level? So I think like depending on which company you're at, a squad would be like at the team level basically, and then hopefully influence other teams to adopt Canonical Everything through cross-pollination.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest point of leverage to implement this is the PMs, because to the point that the question earlier, a lot of PMs are doing the project management. So naturally they're the ones projecting in the meeting. So they're the ones who get to choose what to project. And so, as the head of product, I am responsible for the PM community. I feel so strongly that this is such a leveraged function to get the rest of the company through cross-pollination to adopt. The PMs are often working with other functions, other teams. And if they're doing this, they're the ones sort of getting other people to adopt it too, just through working with them.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Okay.
Sammy, let's ask you a question, okay? From Chun Jing Wu. You mentioned product management. You mentioned product manager needs to do both product and project management, which I agree. Wonder how that program management part should be divvied up between the product and project program managers. Thanks, Sammy. This is a great question because we have our team has product managers, which is your team, and cross-product program managers, which is our colleague Mayumi's team. So how do you see the division of work between your team and Mayumi's team?
Yeah, I mean, I really think of it as like, we're very, very complementary, especially, I mean, our colleague Mayumi that you were mentioning, she is like my rock. I think of her as like my operational counterpart very much, and we collaborate on a lot of different things. And I think actually the fact that we both have this like overall Canonical Everything framework to start from, but we still approach problems with a somewhat unique perspective is almost like the perfect combination. So actually, the more that you can pair a product manager and a program manager, you're just like going to cover so much more ground, basically, which is like kind of what you need to do in order to get Canonical Everything to be a culture. But I kind of think of it back to like, how I think about every PM in relation to an XFN partner, whether it's a designer or a program manager or a researcher or, or a data scientist, which is really like, I think of like the PM as like, hey, we're here to make sure that we complement and bring out the best in whatever our teams are doing. And so a lot of what I think about is like, okay, what is the unique skill set that I can bring to this? What is the unique skill set that Mayumi can bring to this? And it will actually even change depending on like, who you're working with potentially. But I think by and large, I really think of like product and program management very much as like product, we are here to complement everyone. We are here to bring out the best.
Yeah.
And so the more that we can sort of like develop that out of our teams and make sure that, you know, everyone is set up for success, the more successful we're all going to be.
And there was a follow-up question on that, Sammy. Is the QB usually the equivalent of the program manager or project manager? And I think that's really interesting because it depends on the project. Like sometimes you are the QB and sometimes someone on my, you know, Mayumi or someone on her team is the QB. I guess it sort of depends if the project tends to involve more product work or more business operational work. And depending on that, the QB for that project would lean either product or project.
Exactly. Like, so for example, Mayumi, who is Naomi's director of operations and leads the program management team on her team. She was the QB for our rebrand last year, you know, so which is very much this like massive, it did have product implications. And actually this is a perfect example because I was the QB for the product work stream within that, but the lion's share of the work that really needed to happen was on marketing and policy and comms and really making sure that like, you know, and like, what does our logo look like? And that's really like Mayumi's just bread and butter. And I led the very specific parts that impacted the product. And that was like a perfect example of like divvying up the work between us.
I love that.
All right, so do we have time for one more question maybe?
Yeah, sure.
All right, I think you probably stopped right here at Olivia's question, maybe? Okay, how do you coexist or get around the view that the single source of truth is in technical systems like Rally or Jira?
Okay, I have to be honest, Sammy, do you even know what Rally or Jira is? I do not know what that is.
I have heard of Jira. I am not familiar with Rally, but I think they're like project management systems, basically.
Okay. Right. We don't have, I guess we have a tasks and internal homegrown task system. So we don't use Rally or Jira. This is a really interesting question because if I look at the tools that we use at work, and Sammy, I'd be interested in your opinion here too. Even if we use Rally or Jira or a task management system, I think you still need a lot of complementary productivity tools. For example, you know, Google Docs. How are you collaborating with people on something that involves a lot of writing and like prose and content? Google Slides. How are you collaborating with people on something that has a lot of visuals or is something to be projected into a meeting? We used to use Quip. To the point about Canonical Everything, I think Quip and Google Docs are relatively overlapping. And so we decided, let's choose Google Docs so we have everything in one canonical place so we don't need to look at both. But I'm curious if Google Docs, Google Slides, Rally, Jira, task management systems are actually complementary rather than fully overlapping.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that like they probably work really effectively together. I mean, I haven't actually used Rally or Jira, just to be totally honest. So it's possible that maybe they have some sort of functionality that sort of like accomplishes what you need from a canonical doc anyway. I do though think, and this is something that we pushes our whole team on pretty frequently, which is also like there is something about removing visual clutter and just making something super simple and easy to read in like 15 seconds or less. Like literally like your CEO should be able to look at a document and understand what you are working on within 15 seconds or less. And so I think that docs really lend themselves to it because it's like, you know, the canonical one pager or something like it's like that. Just make it super, super simple. And then you would link to, you know, your project management system, like an Asana board or something like that, so that it can all like support it. And if people want to go into the details, they always can. Having this just like single, super clear and decluttered thing to look at that's constantly kept up to date. It also makes it easier to keep up to date as well, which is really nice.
Totally. One really quick thing about docs that Guy Rosen just reminded me, he's someone that also geeks out on like these little productivity hacks. If you're using Google Docs and you're creating a canonical doc, make sure to make it pageless so you don't get like this weird page break in the middle of your canonical doc. That's unnecessary unless you're printing it, right? And you can make the width wide so it isn't unnecessarily narrowly wrapping all of your text to achieve the point about visual like simplicity. I think pageless, width wide really gives you a clean, crisp, 15 seconds or less, canonical doc.
Mhm.
I think that's
All right.
it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Naomi.
No, I was just going to say, I think we're wrapping up, and I just really wanted to thank everyone for dialing in, because this is something Sammy and I love talking about. It's really helped us as we've worked on our projects sort of internally, and this is really the first time that we've gotten to share it much more broadly with other product, which is a real privilege for us and honor.
Yeah, this is great. A lot of great energy around this subject. So you guys be sure to connect with Naomi and Sammy here in Hopin. And thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.